Hello, Adult Sunday School Leader. Do you remember that song that was in the opening? That song by Bobby McFerrin, released in 1988, which is hard for me to believe was 36 years ago. Don't worry, be happy. Well, the lyrics of that song, it errs on the side of not caring, but one line certainly rings true. In every life, we have some trouble, but when you worry, you make it double. Or let's be a little more spiritual about it and quote Miss Corrie ten Boom. She said, "Worrying is carrying tomorrow's load with today's strength, carrying 2 days at once. It's moving into tomorrow ahead of time. Worrying doesn't empty tomorrow of its sorrow, it empties today of its strength." Well, this week we're looking at worrying as we continue. We're in that unit, owning a faith that matters. This is the 5th lesson called Confident Faith. The focal passage is Luke 12, verses 22 through 34, and the point of the lesson is faith displaces worry. Well, here's a quick overview of this week's lesson. Jesus addressed his disciples and warned them against worry and anxiety. He encouraged them to trust in God's provision and care, emphasizing that worrying cannot add anything to their lives. Jesus used examples from nature, such as birds and flowers, to illustrate how God takes care of them, and therefore his followers should not be anxious about their needs. Well, this resonated with the audience because many Jews struggled with poverty, and the message of trusting in God's provision, it would have resonated with those folks who were marginalized or oppressed as well. Also, let's remember that the disciples, they had given up their jobs to follow Jesus. Well, Jesus' teachings aim to provide hope, reassurance, and a call to prioritize the kingdom of God over worldly concerns. Now, before we look at our lesson text in detail for this week, let's quickly look at the story that immediately precedes our text. We need to do this because sometimes we will quote verses like our first set of scriptures that we're going to have this week without fully comprehending the context in which the verses were written or spoken. In Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21, Jesus tells the parable of the rich fool. This guy had everything. His crops yielded an abundant harvest, and he didn't even have enough storage to put all the surplus grain. He thought he had it made. And then the rich man said the words that it's now in our modern day vernacular. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But in that parable, the man was to die that very night, and he wouldn't get to enjoy his earthly riches. And Jesus summarized the parable in Luke 12:21. He said, "This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." The rich man's wealth was invested in the temporary, not the eternal. That's why in the beginning of our first set of verses for this week, in Luke 12, 22 through 26, Jesus said this to his disciples. He started off with the word, therefore. Now in English, whenever we see that word, therefore, you know you've got to stop and see what it's there for. The word indicates that something was mentioned before whose consequences are defined after it. The rich man was concerned only for his physical comfort, and he neglected his spiritual life. When he died, his ability to enjoy the physical ceased, and he had an eternity of spiritual poverty awaiting him. That's why in verse 22, which is immediately after the parable of the rich fool, Jesus said, "Therefore, disciples, you don't worry about this life." The rich farmer, he worried because he had too much, but the disciples might worry because they didn't have enough. Remember, they'd given up their jobs and everything to follow Jesus. So don't be concerned about your life, either what goes in your body, food, or what is on your body, clothes. God is good, and if he can be trusted with the big stuff, he gave you life, then trust him with the little stuff like food and clothing. Jesus then gives a couple of examples from nature to address worrying about food and clothing. He started off by mentioning ravens and addressing the first concern, and that was food. Now, let's remember the Jewish culture. Ravens are scavengers, and they were unclean animals. So if God takes care of even the unclean animals, that they don't even fret about their next meal, how much more, there's that phrase again that we had last week, how much more valuable is a person compared to an unclean raven? If God takes care of these lower forms of life, what makes you think he won't take care of you? And I find it interesting that Jesus ties the raven illustration back to the previous story of the rich fool. The farmer was going to tear down his barns and build bigger ones, but the raven has no barn. He has no storeroom. Yet he's able to eat and to live. Now, can worrying even add an hour to your life? Jesus says, well, no. As a matter of fact, it's shown that worrying is bad for you. We've all heard about the physical ramifications of excessive worry. So I asked my physician, who is WebMD, this, and here's the answer. Chronic worry and emotional stress can trigger a host of health problems. The problem occurs when fight or flight is triggered daily by excessive worrying and anxiety. The fight or flight response causes the body's sympathetic nervous system to release stress hormones such as cortisol. These hormones can boost blood sugar levels, triglycerides, and they can be used by the body for fuel. These hormones also causes physical reactions such as difficulty swallowing, dizziness, dry mouth, fast heartbeat, fatigue, headaches, inability to concentrate, irritability, muscle aches, muscle tension, nervous energy, rapid breathing, shortness of breath, sweating, trembling, and twitching. When the excessive fuel in the blood isn't used for physical activities, the chronic anxiety and outpouring of stress hormones can have serious physical consequences, including the suppression of the immune system, digestive disorders, muscle tension, short-term memory loss, premature coronary artery disease, and heart attack. So no, worrying cannot add anything to our life. It can not only shorten the length of life, but also its quality. If worrying can't change the smallest thing, then why worry about the big things? So let's look on in Luke 12:27 through 30, and here Jesus used another example from nature, wildflowers, to address the other concern, which is clothing. Now, if you drive along the interstate, you might occasionally run into a group of wildflowers that's growing in the median or on the side of the road. If you're in the hill country of Texas, it might be bluebells. Here in Arkansas, you might see black-eyed Susans or Indian paintbrushes. These flowers add so much beauty to otherwise plain fields. Wildflowers they're just in bloom for a season, and they clothe the grass, they clothe the fields for just a short time. And their beauty exceeds the splendor of King Solomon. He was the richest king in Israel's history, and he had his choice of the finest clothing. So if God clothes the field so beautifully, how much more will he take care of your clothing needs? Don't worry about food. Don't worry about clothing. Now, do you need to be concerned? Certainly. Yeah, this is not permission to be lazy. The raven just doesn't laze around in its nest and wait to be fed. No, it has to go out and find the food. So there's an element of personal responsibility on our part. But for us, worry will never put food on the table or clothes on our back. Now remember, in the first set of verses, Jesus mentioned the raven, which is an unclean animal. Well, now he says that worrying about earthly things, that's what the Gentiles or the pagans do. And in that day, a good Jewish person would never want to be compared to a Gentile. Now, let's look at that last set of verses. Instead of worrying, instead of fretting about the things of this world, what are we supposed to do instead? Seek God's kingdom. Now, what does that mean? Well, remember last week we mentioned that God's kingdom refers to God's spiritual reign. So to seek God's kingdom is to seek his reign, his authority in your life. And how do we do that? Well, we do that by reading and obeying the word, worshiping, repenting, being thankful, all those things that God expects us to do. So we are to continually seek God's kingdom. And what does verse 32 tell us? That God is pleased to give us the kingdom. He delights in people turning to him. And the treasure that we store up is not on earth. It's in heaven. It's secure. And it's more valuable than anything we could accumulate here on earth. Then Jesus said this, and this can be taken out of context, of course. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Now, by that, Jesus didn't mean sell everything you have and give it away. Because if he did, what happens? You're poor. And then others would have to sell everything they have and give to you. And then they're poor and you're going to have to sell everything. And you see how that's just ridiculous. Instead, what he's talking about here is hoarding. Don't hoard like the rich fool. Store up all your stuff. Let's be generous. God is generous. He provides abundantly. And the character of his children should reflect God's character. Well, as we conclude this lesson on being confident in our faith and not submitting to the temptation to worry, let's remember what Irma Bombeck said. She said, worry is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it never gets you anywhere. Okay? Let's turn our worry list into a prayer list. In fact, a good question to ask your class may be, what role does prayer play in overcoming worry? You know, maybe there's someone in class that could share a personal story about how the power of prayer helped them in an anxious time. Maybe that person is you. Well, next week is going to be the last lesson in our unit, and it's going to be about having a maturing faith. It'll be out of Luke 17. Thank you guys so much for watching. I do appreciate you. Have a great Sunday. Don't forget, pray for and with your class.